What is going on, friends and fellow artists? This is Matt, aka Mr. E in 3D. And guys, in today's video, we are going to be starting a new character art project, and it is one that I've been putting off for a very long time, but I am super excited to finally be getting to. Now, recently I reread my favorite book trilogy of all time, The Lord of the Rings, and I got to revisit my favorite fictional character of all time, Gandalf the Gray. Now, as I was reading the early chapters of this book, I came to realize that the description that Tolkien gives us in the original book is somewhat different than the version that we saw in Peter Jackson's adaptation in the early 2000s. Now, Gandalf in the books is almost cartoonish in his appearance. He has these exaggerated features, and I thought it would be absolutely awesome to capture those features in my character art style and 3D print it for my collection. Now, Gandalf's introduction in the novel The Fellowship of the Ring is exactly the same as we see in the film adaptation. He is riding into Hobbiton with his cart for Bilbo's 111th birthday. And his description in the book is in the chapter, The Long Expected Party, and this is how he's described. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Now, if you read The Hobbit, his description is almost identical. The only exception is, in The Hobbit they describe that his beard is actually down to his belt line. So, we already see quite a few differences, quite a few exaggerations. I cannot wait to try and model him into my character art style. So, let's jump into Blender and let's get started. We are starting out in Blender 4.0 with the generic head model I have created for all character projects for the channel. The link to that video is in the description of this one. I will start the process by selecting vertices with both right clicks as well as the B key to box click multiple vertices and faces at a time. I will use G to grab and manipulate those vertices, as well as use the S key to scale out all initial features into a more unique shape prior to adding any new details. You will see me doing a lot of preliminary work around the ears and nose, and this is of course because Gandalf appears to those around him as an old, hunched-over traveler. If you know Tolkien lore, you know this is merely for appearances, as the original texts state that the wizards of Middle-earth are actually angelic beings known as the Maiar, whom have been selected to enter the world and help mankind, and they have chosen the disguise of an old person to appear more approachable and less intimidating. I'm simply going through and adding some loop cuts here and there with Ctrl R to give me some guidelines for his brow, as well as add a little bit more definition to some of his existing features. After this, it's time to move on to his mouth. I will use the K for knife utility and cut new lines and vertices to form the shape of both the top and the bottom lips. As a habit, I always create the mouth unique to each character, as typically there is a unique expression that I'm trying to emulate. However, for the creation of Gandalf, I'm going to be doing things a little different. Now, after all of the initial shaping is done, and I've created lines to connect the mouth to the rest of the face, I will then click E to extrude out each lip individually. I will then use G, grab them, and pull them down into their final default position. Once shaped, I will then select the interior faces of the mouth, and I will hit E to extrude them back further into the head. I am creating this model with the hopes of eventually posing multiple figures of Gandalf at a later date. Creating the mouth open allows for different versions with different facial expressions. Now that all of the standard facial features are established, we are ready to start adding more of the character-specific details. I will do some final decision making as to where I want those details to start, and then I will use the knife utility again to start cutting new lines and vertices for his beard and mustache. Once the knife work is complete, I will highlight the beard line faces, hit E to extrude them out and down, and begin shaping the beard. Now in the book, Gandalf's beard is described as going down all the way to his belt line, but for now, I'm only going to extrude this about a foot or so off his chin, and extrude it the rest of the way towards the end of the process. For the brows, I'll select the faces, hit Shift D to duplicate them, pull them above the head, and then hit P to separate them out into their own model. I will add loop cuts and lines to the new brow model, define them, and then extrude them into a three-dimensional form. The eyebrows are going to be a key feature for other parts of the build, so I want to be able to make changes to them without affecting the rest of the head, and that's why I go through this process. I'm utilizing a technique that I would typically use for longer hair, and I think it will serve me here later on, as once I have his brows the way I want, I will be able to pull them down into position and continue on with the rest of the build. Now, if you are new to the channel, you are probably wondering why I'm not creating his hair and beard with particle effects, and this is because my primary goal is always to 3D print the characters I design. As such, I have to actually 3D model solid hair so that I can print once I have them completed. I've created eyes for all of my characters in a separate file, and a video describing that process out on my channel under the playlist for Blender tutorials. For this build, I will simply import the eye style that I have selected for Gandalf, drop them down into position. It's a technique that saves me a lot of time and allows for one style of eye to easily be replicated between all of my projects and characters. Now, before I go any further, I've decided to add some additional wrinkles and a little bit of aging around the eyes for just a touch more detail. So using loop cuts and the knife tool, I will create those details before continuing to the next phase. And now it's time to start his famous hat. I will start this like I do with most models. I will add a plane, split it down the middle, delete the left side, and add a mirror modifier so that what is done to the right side of the model is also committed to the left. I will add some loop cuts and start rounding out the shape to form the brim, and then tilt that into position so that it can be shaped around his brows. The books state that his eyebrows are so bushy that they extend beyond the brim of his hat, and this is an image I could never really wrap my imagination around until now. I've decided that for my rendition, the brim of his hat will look floppy and worn, like it's aged and been around for a very long time. Its shape will be defined by his ears and stiff eyebrows, which will actually push the brim up and away from his eyes, and then flop back down in the center over his nose. This is an idea I really liked in my initial concept sketches, and I hope it translates well into 3D. It is a key descriptor Tolkien shared in both The Hobbit and The Fellowship of the Ring. To create the rest of his hat, I will add a cylinder and then create some loop cuts around the center. I'll scale it down and angle it so that it forms the pointy top. Again, I'm trying to create this with the idea that it is a very old hat that has seen many years and changes in season. Since I'm not creating this with a mirror, I'm also doing a lot of this in wireframe mode so that I can make sure to grab all of the loops when slimming down the shape into the final form. After the final shaping, I will highlight the lowest loop of the hat, Click E to extrude, and then immediately hit S to scale it out and form the base of the hat, just to add a touch of extra detail. And now that his hat is finally complete, we're ready to move on and start creating his hair. Now again, I have done a video previously on how I go about the process of creating hair for my characters. That video is out on my channel, but here I will follow the same principle I used for the eyebrows. I will define his hairline, I will duplicate the faces, pull them away from the head, hit P to separate them out into their own model. I will then go into that scalp model and begin the process of modeling out the hair separate from the head, so that if I do make mistakes, I can simply delete the scalp and retry. As I am planning on eventually doing several different versions of Gandalf, you will see that I also save a copy of his full scalp for a later build. Now we can ignore this for now, as the model we are currently creating, we only need hair created for the back of his head, as his hat will cover up the rest. As before, I will add loop cuts to the scalp and then create the wave by selecting every other line and pull them away, creating the desired 3D effect. I will then select the entire model, click E to extrude, and turn it into a solid object before fitting it to the back of the head. As for his beard, I will use the exact same principles by adding lines and then grabbing every other one and pulling them out to give the beard its initial definition. Now, I will do some additional detailing offline, but at this point, you have a good idea of the overall process. I'm going to separate out the model for his mustache and utilize a spiky hair variation I have often used in the past. This technique is a little different as it requires me to commit the subdivision on the secondary model and then pull random vertices out and spikes before subdividing it again. Now this is another technique I've gone over previously, and truthfully, this was my third attempt to get his mustache looking right. It just goes to show that sometimes it takes multiple ideas or techniques to get the results you want. As we near the end of this process, I will go ahead and create some teeth for him using a plane. I will add the plane, shrink it down to the correct size, and then I will add some lines via loop cuts with Ctrl R, and then extrude them out individually to form the teeth. I will then turn on relational editing and round out the teeth before duplicating it to create a bottom set to match the top. Lastly, I import a generic body into the file so that I can lengthen out Gandalf's beard to the appropriate length, down to his belt line, and then I add a couple more loop cuts to assist with posing later on. So guys, here he is with all the final detailing done, Gandalf the Gray, ready for the second half of the project in the next video. Make sure to sub so you can be notified when it drops. As always, like, share, comment down below with any feedback you have. Appreciate y'all so much. Have a great day.